Have you ever felt this? I'm preaching faithfully, I'm putting in the work, but discipleship just feels slower than my vision. If that's you, I want you to hear kind of clearly right from the start of this conversation. The issue is not effort, and it is definitely not your commitment to scripture or anything like that. It's usually something much simpler and easily fixable. It's where the sermon planning begins. That might be the issue. Most of us were trained to start sermon prep with a very reasonable question, right? What do I want to say? I went to seminary, I have a doctorate in ministry. Like a lot of you, I'm trained and I was trained this way. What do I want to say? So we choose a text, right? We identify the theme. We do all the good exegetical and hermeneutical work. We build an outline. I was taught 3 points in a poem until I learned a better way. No offense. But we work towards application. And none of that is necessarily wrong, but there is a more important question that often gets skipped. Who is going to hear this? That is such an important question, and we usually never even ask it. Or if we do, we ask it towards the end of the planning process. But listen, I'm here to tell you, that single question changes everything. Think about it, right? Every Sunday, you are preaching to a room that looks, mostly unified on the surface, but is spiritually very diverse underneath, right? You have people in the room who are exploring faith, maybe for the very first time. You have people who are brand new believers, people who are maybe growing steadily. You have people that are multipliers, helping other people grow. They're so mature. They all are going to hear the same sermon, but they aren't all going to experience it the same way. Right? The same challenge that kind of excites a mature believer, right, may confuse that seeker. The same application that motivates a growing disciple may overwhelm someone who's barely kind of holding on or learning about this. And when we don't kind of account for that, right, sermons can accidentally end up kind of feeling very faithful, but unclear. This is why I say it's not kind of a preaching problem. It's really a starting point problem. The gap becomes more obvious when we kind of zoom out to series planning. Let's just use that as an example. Like most series planning conversations revolve around topics, right? Especially if you're in a topical-based kind of preaching church. What feels timely right now? What hasn't been taught in a while? What would make a compelling series? This isn't necessarily wrong, but sometimes even these kinds of churches start with what word jumps off the page to me, or what phrase seems like we could build something around, okay? Again, we're going to assume just no suspicion. Great exegetical work, hermeneutical work, great research, commentary work, all of that. But when we begin with that topic, we rarely ask the question, who are we primarily trying to disciple in this moment, in this series, in this sermon, or even in this season? Like, who needs clarity or challenge right now? Who are we trying to move, and where are we trying to move them? And yet, right, series and sermon planning are, it's some of the most formative discipleship decisions a church makes, and we make it irrelevant of the people who are going to hear it. When the series are built kind of without that clear person in mind, something very predictable happens. Okay, seekers, they feel kind of talked over. New believers can start feeling overwhelmed. A growing believer may feel a little under-challenged. And a mature believer, they start to feel even unnecessary. Have you felt any of that at your church before? And here's the problem. Hardly any of us know what to do with that or what to do next to rectify it. That's why intentional sermon planning or series planning always has to start with who, not what. Right? Starting with the right person doesn't mean abandoning, though, what you want to say, right? It just means deciding on who you are building the message for, or different elements of the message for, before you start building it. So when you know who's going to be listening, you know what language to use. You know what kind of examples or illustrations to use. You know how much explanation or context may be needed. You know where to create more tension or where you don't have to create as much tension. And you know what kind of application is going to make sense for them, because categorically, different applications fit different people. And listen, that is not dumbing things down. It's actually pastoral wisdom to do that. You do this in individual counseling all the time. You do this in so many places. We need to do this in our sermon and series planning. Now, at some point along the way, if you start thinking about this, it probably is dawning on you, and maybe it already has, right? Okay, hold on, Gavin. That all sounds good, but I am preaching to all of these categories at once. They are all sitting in the room, all of them right now. And you know what? That's true. Yes, that's true. But this is why this kind of thinking and clarity matters even more. Right? You don't need to preach 4 different sermons. Can you imagine having 4 different sermons? One for seekers, one for, what a nightmare, right? So you don't need to preach 4 sermons. But what you might want to do is design one sermon with 4 kinds of people in mind and intentionally layer things so that everyone can kind of figure out where they're at in the journey and know what to do next. The word we use for this a lot in the speaking, preaching circle is concentric circles. Like you build the message probably primarily for one person, but then you also acknowledge other people in the room concentrically, right? So you don't confuse them or lose the focus. Remember, the goal in this is not equal airtime, okay? The goal is creating clarity and movement for each category of people. In fact, here's a very easy principle that may be worth remembering for this. Clarity for one person can create movement for every person. Okay, so giving clarity for one person can create movement for all of those people and maybe even everybody in the room. And this really matters because sermons, as I mentioned earlier, are shaping tools in your discipleship system, potentially the most important shaping tool in your discipleship pathway. So whether you planned that way or not, this is what's happening. So every sermon answers kind of a question for the listener. What kind of disciple am I expected to be here? What really matters in this church? What should I do next? Every sermon is answering those questions, again, whether we are intentionally asking them or not. So when those kind of answers are unclear, people, you know what they do? They get stuck, they stall, they stagnate, they don't move along the pathway. And it isn't because they are being resistant, it's just because they're uncertain. So let me give you a very practical step that you could maybe consider walking away with. Before you plan your next sermon or your next series, just pause and answer this one question in one sentence. Who needs this most right now? That's it. And let that answer shape everything that follows, your text, your illustrations, your application, your next steps, right? Discipleship won't happen by accident, and sermons are too powerful to be disconnected from the pathway. So start with who, and then you may watch some clarity begin to creep through.